I don't think it's underrated. I think, birders in Australia have the level of sort of respect, so to speak, or admiration of the Mallee that it deserves. I think, which is not something that can be said for some other habitats, perhaps. But the Mallee is really well known for birders, and rightly so. I think that you just get so many
Yeah,
amazing species and sought after
I mean,
species.
most people, if you mention the Mallee and they're not a birder, even people in Melbourne, no one knows where it is. It's kind of like in the UK, the Broads or the Fens, and you're talking about a kind of thing. It's this nebulous term that people
Yeah.
don't really understand. I mean, we were probably the same. I think it was birding that gave us that understanding of the area. But a lot of people locally didn't even realise how important it was as a environmental kind of area.
Hello, everyone, and welcome back to another episode of the Birding Today podcast. I'm your host, Thomas Doerig. Hope everyone's doing well. Just a quick intro, or pre-intro, so to speak. The competition that's going on currently, the giveaway that I'm doing with Craig Boase from Wild Portraits, has a deadline of tomorrow, the 17th of September, Saturday, 17th of September. So if you haven't written to me yet, do so, and please make sure you also like the Birding Today Facebook page and the Wild Portraits Australia Facebook page as well. And if I'm honest with you, there haven't been that many entries. So if you do drop a line and like both our pages, it's likely that you'll get one of these beautiful prints that Craig has generously supplied for the competition. So just a little heads up. So 24 hours. If you can get your emails in within the next 24 hours, that'd be great. And the deadline will be end of the day on Saturday 17th. Okay, so what's coming up is a great chat I had with Michael Gooch from Explore the Mallee. It was fabulous. So with no further ado, let's jump right into the episode. Thanks, guys. Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Birding Today podcast, where birders come together to discuss the joy of birding. I'm your host, Thomas Doerig. Hope everyone's doing well. Today's guest is an avid conservationist and birder based in the Mallee region of northwest Victoria, where he runs an ecotourism business called Explore the Mallee with his partner Louise. He is also the national coordinator of the National Malleefowl Recovery Group. Epic. As a keen bird photographer, he aims to use his images to connect people with Australia's wonderful bird life. So there's lots to talk about today, so please welcome Michael Gooch on the show. How are you, Michael? Thanks for the time.
No worries. Thank you. Thanks for having me on. I thought I better accept out of sympathy, because I thought if he's come to me as a guest, he must have run out of all of these sensible options. So thanks for having me on. I think it'll be good fun.
Yeah, well, again, thanks for the time, and I'm excited about this particular episode, and I really am, because I love the Mallee. I absolutely love the Mallee, and you've got for those of you watching on YouTube, Michael has got a beautiful background behind him, a virtual background of the Mallee, and it's just, even that is making me want to go back out there. So I guess before we jump into the specifics of that, the core of the show is, what's the joy of birding? Where does it come from for you? Where do you get the joy of birding from?
It's probably a good question. So I came to it probably quite late. I know quite a few people do. We bought a conservation property at Clunes, just near Ballarat, outside of Melbourne. And when we bought the property, we really didn't have much of a clue about anything. We were genuinely ignorant about flora and fauna. We used to go camping quite a bit and enjoyed being outdoors. And then when we bought that property, we started trying to document some of the things that we were seeing. So we didn't even have binoculars at the time. So we bought a pair of binoculars and started seeing all these wonderful birds, and birds that we thought from a distance were all kind of one species, turned out to be quite a few different species. And it really grew from there, kind of just took hold. Once you actually see the detail in some of these birds, and there's a lot of diversity in Australian birds, so it took off from there. And obviously the more you know, the more questions you have, and the more questions you have, the more answers you need to go and try and find. And then of course you realize, okay, well, I'm seeing a selection on one little patch, and then you go somewhere else, and I think just having something that you can just do anyway, really. You just need your binoculars and a bit of curiosity. So I think that's where the joy of the actual birding came out, and obviously the birds speak for themselves, really.
Yeah, definitely, that makes sense to me. And also, I guess from the business side of things, which we'll get into a little bit later, hopefully, the sharing that joy around is a big component as well, isn't it?
Absolutely, yeah. And I think it's a really nice hobby because largely it is very collegiate. Obviously in the early days of us starting, we had some close friends in and around Melbourne who, excuse the pun, took us under their wing and, kind of took us out to some good spots and helped us with that whole, that whole process of learning how to ID a bird, how to find those birds, and that really helps. So I think being able to share it, and everyone's at a various point along their journey of being a birder. So it's nice to be somewhere along that continuum. There's always going to be better birders. There's always going to be newer birders. So I think just accepting that is a nice part of birding.
For sure. And so you're correct me if I'm wrong, but I think you're not originally Australian. You're from the UK, aren't you?
I am, yeah. So I grew up in the UK, lived all over. My dad was in the army, so we kind of shuffled around a bit. So I've lived outside of the UK a lot longer than in the UK. But birding really has taken off by being here. Probably the past 15 years in earnest has been where we've really got quite heavily into birding, and then subsequently bird photography as well. But what about yourself? What got you into birding?
Well, I have a little bit like you. I have a little bit of a nomadic background. So I was originally born in France, and my mum is from Somerset.
Yeah.
And my dad is Swiss. So, and we ended up here for a variety of reasons. But Australia is just fabulous for birds, isn't it? And I think
it really is.
Yeah, it is apart from other places in the world for a variety of different reasons, I think, and each person has different ways to get to birding, and there's such a variety of habitats as well. And I want to jump right into your speciality, the Mallee, because I had Tim Dolby on the show, I think in season 2 at one point, and that was a great discussion, and we talked about hattah-kulkyne. Just the mind-blowing diversity of the parrots you get there, and how it's world-renowned. So what's your take on the before we get to the birds, what's your take on the habitat itself, the environment of the Mallee?
It's one of those ones that is a real surprise if you drive through, because obviously there's so much farming in the landscape, and you can drive through and you might have roadside verges of 10, 15, 20 meters wide on either side of the road, and even those can really sustain quite a bit of diversity. So I think on first looks, people might think, oh, this is a pretty barren landscape, there's not much diversity. But even in, my little section, which we live adjoining, Northern Widefeld, even in Northern Widefeld, you've got a huge variety of kind of habitat. I think it's just very, very different than other aspects of Victoria. It's much lower trees. Obviously, the Mallee eucalypt species are a lot lower, which frankly is fantastic for birding because it's really good on your neck. When you go into these big mountain ash areas, after about 20 minutes, you need an ice pack and a rub down. But the Mallee is certainly quite useful for birding, and it's just one of those places that really gets its hooks into you. I mean, we had only been up here for a pretty disastrous birding trip in, I think it was 2016. It was the year where there was really big storms came through, when some of the pylons got knocked over in South Australia and things. And we'd taken 10 days off, and on day 3 we were camping in Murray Sunset, and the park keepers came around and kicked us all out and said there's a big storm coming. Oh, wow. So it was just, really pretty heavy storm. So that truncated it. So when we came to look at this property, we were, again, pretty clueless about the Mallee. We knew, obviously, that it was a pretty unique series of habitat structures up here. And, we just fell in love with the property. And then, We didn't intend actually living here when we bought the property. We just wanted to preserve it. So where we live is on 2 parcels of land. There's a farmer's paddock between our house block and our conservation reserve that we've put permanent protection on. And so we came up here at one Easter. We settled the day before Good Friday in 2018, and we came up for the Easter holiday. Then we came up in April for a few days, and then we came up for the June long weekend, and that was it. We were like, right, we've got to move up here. It kind of got its hooks into us.
I see.
So I always say to people, you know, if you can get people into the Mallee once, they'll be back.
Yeah, definitely.
It just seems to have, that was a really waffly long answer to a fairly straightforward question. And I think that's probably why, because it is just hard to pin down. You ask people what they love about the Mallee, and it's just the Mallee. It's just got so many elements which are unique, and just the light and the birds. Let's say that array of parrots that you said Tim referred to, the parrot selection up here is just incredible. You know, to have these birds flying around in the same way you would have spotted doves or common miners in Melbourne, where we used to live. You know, pretty spectacular.
Definitely, yeah. Oh, and it's. I'm really interested to get into the specifics of your operations as a tour operator as well, down the line. But to remain also on the topic of the Mallee in general, it's such an extensive habitat. You know, it goes right into South Australia, and then you know it's so vast that it's mysterious in a way, and that's what I love about it as well. And you mentioned that the quality of the birding in the Mallee, in terms of the heights of the trees, which is so accurate. And also another thing that I would add to that is that the weather's usually brilliant.
Yes.
And so
sometimes too good.
And you get great light, especially, you know, in the at dusk and dawn, you know, for photographers in particular. Like, I think it draws a lot of photographers, and you must have a lot of photographers that come up to see you.
Yeah, absolutely. I'd say probably, you know, 85 to 90% of our guests are bird photographers. We do get landscape photographers and astrophotographers as well, because obviously the other thing with the Mallee is it's such a vast area and not hugely habituated. There's small towns, so you get zero light pollution. So that's the other thing, you know, when people come camping or come stay, and just seeing those full array of stars and the Milky Way really clearly, and proper jet black, no light pollution. So yeah, I think just as a photography destination outside of birds, even it's pretty spectacular. The morning and the evening light is just to kill for, you know. It's pretty special.
Thank you for listening to the Birding Today podcast. It's great to have you with us. If you're enjoying the show, don't hesitate to leave a positive review on whichever podcast app you're using at the moment. This really helps with getting the podcast up in search results and reaching more people. Thank you, and back to the show. And so there's lots to unpack also in terms of let's get down to Explore the Mallee. What is Explore the Mallee, and what is its purpose? And I actually thought that you had been going longer than that, but it's quite a recent undertaking, comparatively speaking.
Yeah, so we moved up here 4 years ago. Explore the Mallee. So Explore the Mallee is an ecotourism business. We have accommodation. We have the conservation reserve that we have a couple of bird hides set up down at, and permanent water points. And then I'm also a licensed tour operator with Parks Victoria. So I do tours in hattah-kulkyne, Wadfeld, Murray Sunset, and also a small reserve just south of us called Waith Flora and Fauna Reserve. So when we moved up here, it was just a bit of a hole, I guess, for accommodations relatively sparse in the Mallee, outside of motels, and we just thought there was a bit of a need for it. And also, to be honest, we had a real desire to share it with people and to kind of focus on that nature-based tourism that we thought that the Mallee deserved. So we basically renovated an area and created a kind of standalone accommodation, and we thought, well, let's give it a try. And we were both working full-time at the time, so we were running the business for probably about 18 months before I took it on full-time at the start of last year. And it just took off. It just it fulfilled what we expected, that people did have a desire to come and spend time and kind of slow down a bit. I mean, the other thing with the Mallee to remember as well for people who aren't aware of it is it's really a 5-hour drive from Melbourne. It's a pretty remote spot. So understandably, often when people come up here, they can be quite time poor and you might only have a weekend, and it's a long way to come for a weekend. So we wanted to try and give people bang for their buck for time, and kind of shortcut some of that running around. As you say, it's a big area, so if you don't know where to be looking, you can spend most of your time chasing your tail and chasing the tail of the blue bonnets as they disappear off into the distance. So we kind of wanted to give people an opportunity to just slow down, get out the city. Our real intention was to promote the Mallee, and promote the beauty of the Mallee, but also give people a space where they can just come and relax and just let everyday worries kind of drop away.
Definitely, yeah. So it's sort of a multifaceted sort of thing that you've got going, because you've got accommodation as one service, and then the aspect of touring and actually seeing the place and guiding as well.
I also do photography workshops as well. So if people want to come up and learn more about wildlife photography and bird photography, I run workshops for that as well.
Yeah, brilliant. It's brilliant, and it's quite unique. I think you must, because there's of course lots of birding tours that go out there, but I imagine that they're more Melbourne based permanently, and then they kind of get their tentacles up in the Mallee. But you're really based in there, which is an advantage.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think just even the accommodation, I mean, as lots of guests can attest, just the amount of birds around the property. So often if you're staying in Oyen, or if you're staying in, say for instance, if you were going to Hattah and you were staying in Mildura, you've got that travel to actually be in the environment. Whereas here we're nice and remote, so people can sit outside the front of the accommodation with their glass of wine and see, ringnecks and different honey eaters coming into the aeromophila and some of the plants around the property. So it removes a lot of that travel. So you're getting, for want of a better term, that passive birding in. It's the same as when you go into Queensland, places like Lamington or Chambers Resort. It's just around you. You're just kind of immersed in it, rather than having to actively have that separation between accommodation and where you're actually doing your birding.
Definitely,
I think we do have a very unique offering, I guess.
Yeah, no, definitely. And I think that's a good point, actually, that you raise in terms of, when you've got, wherever it is in the world, when you've got a lodge or, accommodation that's in a habitat, that's already in a great habitat, say in a national park or in anywhere that is good for birds, you often see a lot of birds at the accommodation, often more so than if you venture out into the more wild parts. But close to the accommodation, there's always lots of bird activity around accommodation.
Oh, for sure. I mean, how many times have you been to a birding destination as well and you see everything in the car park? Or when you actually sit down and take time to have your lunch and the amount of things that come around campgrounds and everything as well. So, just at the start of the year, early February, I was up in Far North Queensland for the first time, and we stayed at Chambers, and, I got woken up by a catbird just outside the window, which was just hilarious. I mean, it was a bird that I'd really wanted to see. I mean, most of my birding has been restricted to Victoria. And so it was just one of those visceral things, going back to the joy of birding. I was in bed and it was kind of, this catbird's right outside the window, and I just couldn't help but laugh, because it was just such a ludicrous call and just so appropriately named. And it was actually one of the highlights of my trip, actually, and everyone else at the end of the trip, everyone's saying their favourite birds, and it was all the ostentatious birds. And for me, one of them was the catbird just wailing outside my window and giving me the giggles.
Yeah, brilliant. Oh, that's you've hit the nail on the head there. Like it's those little moments, I think, that are unexpected, and then they surprise you, even retrospectively when you think back to it. I'm sure it's like, that was strange, that moment. Like, that's brilliant. And so delving deeper into your business operation and the everyday life that you have, what are the joys and the advantages that that leap to mind when I mention joys and advantages of running such a business?
I think it goes back to what I was saying. You know, when you see the Mallee start unfolding with people, and we've been really lucky. We've got some really loyal guests who come back most seasons. You know, so that's one of the joys, is building up a really good rapport with people and making some good friends with people that we've met through it. So it's kind of, it doesn't feel like it sits outside of our lifestyle. It feels like it's kind of nestled in with our lifestyle. I mean, Louise is very strong on plants and flora, and I'm kind of slowly picking up on that. And so we have people come up who a lot of people have birding and another strong passion. Often it's wildflowers, for instance. So it's nice, that two-way exchange. That's one of the real genuine pleasures of having just the one accommodation option, because you can spend as much time as people want to. I mean, we don't want to be in their pockets, and vice versa. There's that space to kind of explore each other's interests. And I think as well, for some reason, birding tends to favour people who've got a bit of an academic bent or a bit of a natural curiosity. So we've had quite a few people with scientific backgrounds or academic backgrounds who always illuminate us on other matters as well. So that, but also being out with people, and you can see as they start kind of that feeling chipping away of there's nothing here, and you're seeing different things. So if Louise and I both do a tour, Louise can explain some of the wildflowers or some of the vegetation that we're walking through, and how that relates to the birds. And it's really hard to explain. It's just really, really pleasurable and just really joyous to share that. And that's why we started the business, because we fell in love with the place so hard, like proper hooks in, overboard addiction to the Mallee. And so it's just nice to share that and see new eyes appreciating what we appreciate as well.
Yeah, that makes sense to me, and I think how communal is it? I'm trying to paint a picture in my head of it. Like, do you have the what's the capacity? Do you have lots of guests at the same time that can stay, or is it more privatized in terms of the seclusion?
Yeah, so it's only set up for either a double bed or two singles. So friends can come and share if they're happy to share. It's not too far from the house. So we work in quite well with Pine Plains Lodge, who are in the Northern Waterfeld. So Pine Plains is a really good group accommodation. So if a group comes to us and we can't accommodate a big group, we'll suggest maybe they go and stay at the lodge, Pine Plains Lodge, or at the pub in town. And likewise, if smaller groups or just a couple want to stay at the lodge, it's a big operation for them to have just one or two people stay there. So they'll send them to us, and they also refer big groups to us for tours as well. So we've kind of in Patchy Wallock's a really small community.
Yeah,
it's only 130 people.
Wow.
So we work in really well with each other, because if it's good for one of us, it's good for all of us, and it's good for the communities to have people coming in and seeing the town and seeing the surrounding areas. So so it's very small. So either a couple or two people.
Yeah, and that's the idea, isn't it? In a way, is to disconnect from everyday life, and I guess I would. Correct me if I'm wrong, I would say maybe between 70 and 80% of all your guests are from Melbourne. Is that around right?
No, actually, probably only about half, I'd say.
Interesting.
If that. So we do get a lot of regional people, people from the northeast, people from Gippsland, Queensland, New South Wales, a few from South Australia who come over. So I think because it is so remote, people in Melbourne can almost as easily get to Gippsland as they can to the Mallee. But we're actually nearer to Adelaide than we are to Melbourne.
Wow.
Funny enough. So it's only, it's only like 4 hours over to Adelaide. So we're really quite tucked away. So yeah, I'd say it's probably maybe half, just over half. So it's nice having people, as I say, not just from that Melbourne base, but yeah, a bit of diversity.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah. That surprises me. Just if only just because of the numbers that Melbourne has, and and the need for people to get away from a big city, in a sense, that would be outward pressure from a big centre like that, and also Adelaide, wouldn't it?
Yeah.
To get people out, which is which is really, really great. And so you touched on the joys of it. Have there been any big challenges? What are some things that you find difficult?
Giving up your day job to run an ecotourism business when COVID lockdowns kick in, that was a bit of a challenge. That probably wasn't my best timing, but fortunately we survived that really well. And I think as well, having as you said earlier, a bit of a niche, the accommodation, the tours, and it gives people a bit of a one-stop shop. So that helped us. I guess challenging, not so much in dealing with people or anything like that, but the challenges are logistical, I guess, more so. So even just the point of when we were renovating to build the accommodation, our nearest Bunnings is now 40 minutes away. So you've got those kind of supply issues or things like that. The heat in the summer, fortunately, the past couple of years have been pretty mild. But you've got the dual-edged sword there, where on really hot days the birds just love the water. So you're getting a huge diversity of species coming into the water that we have everywhere, around the house, down on the property. So you get a few hours in the morning, a few hours in the evening, and then the real hardcore birds like pipits and that during the day. So some of those really hot, windy days can be a bit of a challenge when you've got to. But yeah, as I say, they don't come too solidly at the moment.
Yeah, you mentioned COVID there, and I was wondering whether or not to bring it up, but it's an interesting situation for not only birding but also ecotourism as a general industry. And have you seen a rebound? Is it back to normal, as it were?
Well, look, I think we're probably quite different than some of the other tour operators who had a really, really big international presence. So we're not international operators. We're a small business, and we probably get a lot more people locally. It was a really interesting thing for us because we had a few people booked in from Melbourne, and we just had to keep rolling and rolling and rolling their booking. But fortunately, we were always able to fill it with regional bookings. So it was only when the state was completely locked down that we did lose bookings overall. But so we didn't generally lose many bookings. We had a bit of a cancellation list running anyway through that period. And so it was a big hit. I know friends who work for some of the other tour operators. They really got whacked, and I really feel for those operators because they've spent so long and building up a reputation with international guests and big tours as well. We're not, we didn't target to be running 6, 8, 10 people tours, So I think to a certain degree we were lucky. We rode out the real spiky points of it. I think what it has done, which has been really fascinating, is brought a lot more people into birding. So a lot of people from Melbourne, particularly this year, I've noticed a real shift in the people who are coming to stay with us. So people who've been restricted to 5Ks in the city have suddenly gone down to their local park. And I think it's just kind of focused. It's forced people to slow down a bit, and it's kind of focused people's attention. And I think that's probably one of the positives that did come out of it, is that people have realised we do have in Melbourne's such a fortunate city for green space generally. I know that's not, that's a bit of a generalised, but overall throughout the city there's generally a pretty good green space. So people have come new to birding, and therefore they've come new to the Mallee as well. So that has been one of the positive shifts out of the whole COVID scenario.
Yeah. No, definitely. I can see that. Yeah, and especially given your location, the fact that it's that remote is a blessing, really, because it's protected by that, isn't it? And the habitat itself, practically speaking, is protected by the relative remoteness as well. And so I want to zoom in a bit on your personal birding, because I would suppose that running a business like this, how do you manage your own? Because you're obviously passionate about birding, and it's your passion, and it's what you love doing. How do you separate the business side of things and the guiding side with, oh, I just want to go out birding today. I don't want to speak to anyone. I want to get a good list. I want to see cool birds. How do you manage that?
It's a good question. I don't see a lot of separation. I think maybe because, I'll rephrase that. There is a separation, but to me, I get as much excitement about someone else seeing their first bird as the first time I saw that first bird. And I guess I get a little bit carried away, and I kind of seek to help people in the same way that I'd be spending the energy trying to see things for myself.
Yeah.
So I think having our property, and again that lack of having to travel. If I was birding in Melbourne and I was having to go somewhere, so a lot of the time we'll be birding when we're doing other jobs. I mean, on a big property like this, there's always stuff to be doing. So the juggling of it was, especially when you start a new business, you want to take every booking, and then you find all of a sudden you've not got any time to yourself to be down on your own property. So that was kind of something that we had to juggle. But I find guiding hasn't eroded any of my joy of being out there. So I just have a different focus when I'm birding, because my focus is trying to get onto birds or hearing birds and sharing that experience rather than just absorbing it for myself. But
right.
I think the set for me and for a lot of the friends who taught us when we were birding, the sharing is a lot of the pleasure in the birding. Sometimes you're right, I just want to get out on my own and sit there and just take in the silence, because even just having half of your brain where you're trying to discuss where the bird is or explain where the bird is.
Right.
Sometimes you just want to sit in one space, no conversation, and just look at just birds doing their thing. It might not be the newest bird, it might not be the greatest bird, but going back to one of your earlier podcasts with Stuart Monkton, I'm not sure if Stuart was your first one.
Yeah, very first one, yeah.
Yeah, cool. Well, so Stuart's been up here a couple of times. He's a really good guy, impeccable music taste. If he's listening, he'll know what I mean by that. One of the things I really liked what Stuart said was talking about wildness, rather than chasing wilderness and just finding the wildness in the moment. So sometimes that solitude or being on your own to experience something, it is irreplaceable. Just being able to have that silence and that meditative space or that contemplative space, particularly if you've got a camera, I think that also focuses that stillness. I've found it's really been very beneficial for my mental health or stress levels to just be able to go out and have those moments of almost meditative space where you can just, that mindful pause, where you've just stopped and all you're thinking about is what you're looking at. Is a great way to be in the present, I think.
Yeah, and the Mallee is ideal for that sort of thing, because it's just that the habitat. It's such a unique place because it's relatively open, isn't it? It's not as dense as some other habitats you get in Australia and around the world, of course. But you still have a little bit of seclusion, and you're guarded by the trees. It's not like you're naked in an open plain. There still is that sense that you're immersed in something, but it's not. Do you see what I'm getting at? It's and
it doesn't take you long to get into a section of the Mallee that feels incredibly remote.
Right.
So even some of my favourite birding places in Melbourne, you've still got traffic, you've still got planes, you've still got that background hubbub behind the birds. Up here, you can have spots where it's most of the Mallee is just complete silence.
Yeah,
you've got no intrusion, and there's just a feel and I think just that dry heat smell in the Mallee often as well. You go elsewhere in Melbourne, you've got that lovely damp hummusy smell or that kind of really strong. I don't know what it is. It's just a really nice place to sit and absorb.
Yeah. I think we underestimate smell as the sense of smell as a way to interpret the world. And the Mallee does definitely. It just when you especially in the morning, there's a specific smell in the morning when you're out,
Yeah.
when I've been camping in Hattah, near Lake Mornpal, that section,
Yes. Yeah.
and you wake up in the morning and it's just this amazing smell and this freshness that
Yes.
that is just doesn't compare to anything else. It's just amazing, isn't it?
Yeah, it is. It is. It is a very addictive spot, as I say. Um,
For sure. I think, and I think it is up there in it. I don't think it's underrated. I think, birders in Australia have the level of sort of respect, so to speak, or admiration of the Mallee that it deserves. I think, which is not something that can be said for some other habitats, perhaps. But the Mallee is really well known for birders, and rightly so. I think that you just get so many amazing species and sought after species.
I mean, most people, if you mention the Mallee and they're not a birder, even people in Melbourne, no one knows where it is. It's kind of like in the UK, the Broads or the Fens, and you're talking about a kind of thing. It's this nebulous term that people don't really understand. I mean, we were probably the same. I think it was birding that gave us that understanding of the area. But a lot of people locally didn't even realise how important it was as a environmental kind of area. So when we first moved up here, we were invited to do an Australia Day presentation because a lot of the locals were kind of curious as to who these weird couple were that have moved into town. And so we did a presentation, and Louise did some plant photography and I had some bird photos. And at that point, we'd just hit 100 species for our property list. And someone was like, 100 birds doesn't seem a lot. I was like, well, they're all different birds. It's not like 100 sparrows. I was like, I didn't know we had that many in Australia. And I kind of had to laugh, And for months afterwards, we had people coming up going, I didn't know we had that bird. And, that I now know what that is. Or we saw this, what do you think it was? And trying to describe birds. So, we've fairly quickly become known locally as, that bird couple down the road. So, which is quite amusing.
Isn't that brilliant? Yeah, that's really cool. And the environmental aspect of it that you touched on is represented somewhat by the malleefowl, isn't it? Because that's the main bird that you see signs of on the road, and so even locals would know what a malleefowl is, right?
Oh yeah, the Mallee hen. They call it the Mallee hen, and the Mallee hen is really well loved.
Right.
I think because they know it's theirs. Obviously the malleefowl extends into sections of New South Wales, across South Australia and WA as well. But Victorian people believe that the malleefowl is theirs, and this region it is their totem bird. And I think there's probably a bit of a parallel there that some of it, because obviously this area, I don't know whether you know the background to, particularly around Patchawallock, it's all First World War soldier settler blocks primarily.
Oh,
so
wow.
I think when they came up, it was a really, really tough existence, to put it mildly. So I think there's kind of a shared parallel in this hard-working, industrious entity living in the landscape and scratching up an existence and thriving in the face of such significant environmental adversity. So whether there's that kind of spiritual alignment as well, I'm not sure. But yeah, the locals love seeing birds.
Hello, dear listeners. It's time to hop north from the Mallee, quite far north in fact, for the species of the episode segment, which today features the yellow oriole. I recently obtained some great video footage of this species, and good audio recordings of it too. The yellow oriole belongs to the Oriolidae family, the Old World orioles, and its call is an iconic tropical sound of northern Australia. It's one of my dips. I've never seen a malleefowl. And
right,
I just the stars never aligned, so to speak. And I seem to recall there was a photo that I don't remember where I saw it, but in one particular year, there's a photo of a roadside, and there's like 15 malleefowls. Do you know which photo I mean?
More, yeah. So when we first moved here, everyone was like, "Oh, this time," and that's actually legit. So it's just north of town. So what happened was during the harvest, a canola truck had obviously been shedding canola seed along the roadsides.
Yeah.
So I've seen a photo, and there's nearly 70 birds along in the same photo along the same stretch of road.
Yeah.
A colleague of mine has got a photo of that, and so yeah, that's one of the first things when people heard that we were birders. There's this time, which is just insane to think of that. It's just an absolutely remarkable thing. But the next time you're down in Victoria and you're up in this region, we'll try and break your duck for you.
That'd be brilliant. Yeah. I'd be honoured, Michael. That'd be great. Yeah.
Well, I think that's one of the things that absolutely hooked us here as well. The very first night that we had the property, we'd driven up from Melbourne. We've got 2 dogs, and so by the time we'd stopped with all the wee breaks for the dogs and the humans, I think it took us like 7 hours or so, and we were shattered. Yeah. And we thought, let's just nip down to the bush block and have a look. And we drove down, and it was, setting sun, and we drove through these bushes, and the malleefowl walked out in front. Nice slow walk, and first hour of owning the property. So wow. I think that was the first brick in the wall to us moving up here. So that was pretty special.
Yeah, cemented you in. Yeah.
Yeah, I think it was just like, and then of course my cynical side kicked in. I said to Louise, we'll probably never see one of them again.
Wow. Yeah,
but fortunately, that's not the case. I think we've got 7 birds pretty much resident on the property. So.
Oh, brilliant. And how big is the property exactly in terms of land area?
So the conservation reserve is 168 acres, and then the house is 51 acres. So we were really fortunate. The previous owner had done quite a bit of revegetation before we bought property, and he passed away, and he was a member of the Victorian Malleefowl Recovery Group, and he actually bequeathed the properties to the Victorian Malleefowl Recovery Group, and then the VMRG listed it on the Trust for Nature website, which Louise happened to see. We weren't looking for property, and Louise happened to see it, and we saw that it kind of is it's basically the northeast tip of Weibfeld. It's direct contiguous right through Weibfeld. So we thought, that is a long way away, but it looks like a pretty unique, option. And we've backwards and forwards about whether to even come and have a look at it, and then we drove up and had a look at it, and just fell in love with it straight away.
Yeah. It was. Yeah. Sometimes you just know, don't you?
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah. And so, do you ever, as a birder, do you ever get? And I presume that you absolutely don't. But do you ever get annoyed that you can't do much birding around other parts of Victoria or the country, or does that not factor into your?
Not annoyed. I'd say, obviously having 2 dogs is a little bit limiting when we go camping, because that rules out all of the national parks and things. But there's so much to see locally. Yeah. Obviously, I'd love to see a lot more of the country. And, after going up to far north Queensland for the first time in February on a tour with Inala down from Tassie, that was just spectacular. It was one of my best mates was leading the tour, and he's a phenomenal birder. So it was just a complete joy. But being able to just spend, there's also a value, I think. I'd love to see new places. I'd love to see new birds. But as I've kind of moved along that birding pathway, that the pressing desire for a new bird on the list has subsided to the wanting to spend more time and gain more of an understanding of the relationships of birds. And there's a lot to be said for being sat in the presence of birds for 2 hours, 3 hours or something. So last year there was pretty much every night for 6-7 months we were seeing the malleefowl, and sometimes I'd sit and watch a bird for like 40 minutes, just go about its business. And
wow,
just seeing, just being able to sit with birds, or even here we have blue bonnets and the different parrots and spiny-cheeked honeyeaters, which are hilarious birds.
Yeah,
coming into the back garden all the time. So be able to have a coffee and just sit and watch a bird for 10-15 minutes.
Yeah,
feels like a real privilege.
Yeah,
it feels like really appreciate the fortune of being able to have that slow time watching birds.
Yeah.
So the answer is no, I don't get annoyed. There's still obviously a desire to see elsewhere. But when you do have opportunities of such diversity in and around within an hour of where we are. And there's still a lot of terrain I haven't seen. I mean, there's still even sections of North Widefeld I haven't been into.
Wow.
You know, I do tours with people in these parks, and then I'll come back and say, you know, this is where we went over 10, 11 hours today, and this is the park. And it's like an ink drop on this map. And it's so there's still a lot, particularly Murray Sunset is just huge. It's hard to convey just how massive that area is.
Yeah, definitely.
So there's a lot of local curiosity still to be fulfilled.
And there might be a sense of, oh, Victoria's a relatively small state, so therefore the Mallee mustn't be that vast, sort of thing going on.
Well, Victoria's only small in relation to Australia. You know, when you put Victoria, if you whacked Victoria into the middle of the UK or France or Switzerland or Belgium, it's not that small. I mean, we're so spoiled in Melbourne as well. If you think from Melbourne, you head west and you've got all that coastal area all out through Portland and, you know, Grampians, and then you head east to Gippsland and out to Mallacoota, even the Dandenongs, you know, right close by. Incredible habitat. Go west of Melbourne half an hour, you've got the Western Treatment Plant and all those Victorian volcanic plains and the Yuyangs, and then you go north, and so we're so sport for habitat. And then, of course, you've got on top of that the Mallees being one of them. So within Victoria, sure, geographically it's not as big as some of the other states, but my God, we've got some incredible wealth of diversity, I think.
Yeah, for sure. And I think that there's varying views on where the Mallee really starts, though, as well. Yeah. Because you do get a lot. You get a lot of the birds, of Mallee birds, that come closer and that trickle down a little bit closer to Melbourne. You know, there's places like Goshen or Inglewood, the railway dam. That's all kind of closer. You know. Do you have where
Camperooka.
would you? Right. Where would you say the Mallee really starts?
For me, I'd say probably from Birchip North, Donald, Charlton, Birchip North. Once you get, if you're coming from Melbourne, once you're kind of past St Arnaud and Avoca and things like that, you start getting into the edges. But you're right, there are patches of Mallee elsewhere, but I think the Mallee proper, so north of Little Desert. You're right. It's a really, and that, I think that's why it's confusing to explain to people, because it is quite nebulous as where to those transitions are. And then east, probably Sea Lake. I'd say it probably starts dropping off maybe a bit.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, it is. It is patchy, and so proceeding to some other different sort of topics that on the show I love to talk about. Do you use eBird a lot in your operation or personally?
Yes, not religiously, like a couple of my mates who full evangelist kind of eBird. eBird can be really useful. eBird can be, and I think coming from looking and discussing and working with people who are using eBird scientifically, it's an insanely good resource for researchers, even citizen scientists who want to, the tools in there to be able to map frequencies. There was a while ago, Matt Crawford, who's a friend of ours, did an analysis of red wattlebird sightings in and around Melbourne. So having that access to people just to answer a few questions about things. Now, obviously, it has its limitations, but I think as a tool, we're really fortunate to be in an age where we have that as a resource. So I try and always eBird certain species up here, the threatened species. So I always record Malleefowl sightings and always try to record anyway. Pink cockatoos, the major mitchell's, and regent parrots. And if something's really unusual, but also those migrants, those spring migrants. So I'll try and document things like when the first cuckoos or the paddlets and the black-eared are seen. Things that I know show patterns, but often what isn't in a list is important what's in a list. But I certainly probably not as diligent as a lot of people out there.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, you mentioned the Major Mitchells and the Regent parrots, just bringing me all back. It's just so magical out there. It's just, and yeah, and also a thought on that as well. The eBird is so great, but you can often become carried away with it a bit, which I'm guilty of. And it goes back to what you were saying about the slow birding, and just because often when you get really sort of focused and obsessed on seeing a particular target species, the joy you get from it is seeing it, which is great in itself. But I think a hidden joy that goes beyond that is really observing it and seeing what it's doing, even if it's just not doing much. It's just taking the time to observe the details, and the environment in which the bird is in. That sort of slow birding, which maybe has become a little bit lost in a sense, perhaps in recent times.
Yeah, look, I think so. And I think it goes back to one of my comments earlier that the Mallee is quite remote, that people think that they can comfortably do it in a weekend, and you can't. Like if you're not giving yourself at least a week, you are going to be rushing around. And it's one of the blessings and the curses of eBird. eBird reinforces hotspots. So if you're time poor and you want to go to a new area, like for me, if I went into South Australia or somewhere I hadn't been, eBird would probably be one of my first resources.
Yeah.
Second would be to actually employ a guide in that area. Third would be to see if there's an online forum for that state or that area, for instance. So what happens is when people are time poor and they want to see a specific species, they'll go somewhere where that's been recorded the most. And what that causes is a really obvious saturation in particular areas. Now, there's probably as much likelihood that you're going to see those birds elsewhere in some of the smaller reserves, particularly some of those more cryptic species, because that area hasn't been absolutely hammered.
Right.
So whilst I can understand, the requirements of people when they're time poor, which unfortunately is most of us, there are often, particularly in the Mallee, there are so many small little bushland reserves that eBird can reinforce those hotspots. And of course, if people are going to a particular spot for a particular species, then that particular spot is always going to be amplified to people as being the spot to go and see that species.
At around this point in the conversation, Michael and I's Zoom call started struggling a little bit with internet connection issues, so I had to cut out some parts that were uneditable, so sorry about that. But if you're listening this far and you're still into it, great to have you with us, and do let us know what you love about the Mallee. I'd love to hear your thoughts about why you think the Mallee is a great place, or if we haven't touched on something that you think would be worth sharing. You can drop me a line at birdingtoday@gmail.com. Thank you, and back to the show. If you had... This is the way I'm starting to formulate the question on the show, is if you had 2 weeks and unlimited resources, and you could go birding anywhere in the world for 2 weeks on your own, where would it be?
See, this is going to be a pretty pedestrian answer, I think. The top end of Australia. There's certainly destinations I'd like to see overseas, but I just think there's so much diversity in Australia and so much range, and especially if I'm on my own, I might have a chance of actually IDing them. Whereas if I was, dumped on my own in Ecuador or somewhere Costa Rica or somewhere like that, I think if I didn't have I'm frustrated than elsewhere. But I really, there's a lot of Australian birding I want to do. So I apologise for the rather dull answer to that one.
It's anywhere really. If you're passionate about birds and if you love the art of birding, I think anywhere is good, really. If it's your local patch, and I've mentioned this on the show before, where I was part of the 5K limit in Melbourne, and so the local patch that we had was Wattle Park, which is comparatively, it's not brilliant, but it's a patch of bushland that does, have that presence of birds that you need, and that was there during the lockdown. So there's lots to say about that, about local birding, and So let's bring this episode to a close, Michael. It's been fabulous chatting to you, and I apologize to listeners for the connection problems, but I'm sure that we can be forgiven for that, because the remote location where Michael
that's
is.
me that should be apologizing, not you.
That's fine, and I think it's all part of it, and it'd be great to meet up when I'm down in Melbourne next, and go up there and see what happens.
Well, maybe it should be the NBN should be apologising.
Probably, yeah.
Fantastic. That would be absolutely wonderful. Thanks very much, and thanks for inviting me. I appreciate it.
All right, thanks, mate. Thank you. See you soon.
Cheers. Thanks. Bye-bye.
Thank you for listening to this episode of the Birding Today podcast, or if you've been watching on YouTube, thank you for watching. This has been a great chat with Michael Gooch from Explore the Mallee, and the Mallee genuinely is one of my favourite habitats, so it was really enjoyable, and I hope you enjoyed it too. That's all for this week, folks, and I'll catch you next week at the same time, same place, for the next episode of the Birding Today podcast. So have a great day wherever you are, happy birding, and catch you later.